Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Real Talks. And I'm happy to have Kyle back with me. And we are here today for another of our segments of our perfect movies. We've got plenty on the list, but this one I think, needs the attention that it deserves, and that is Captain America Winter Soldier. And it's hard to believe that this was actually came out almost 10 years ago, but not quite. So, anyways, first of all, welcome back, Kyle. Nice to see you again.
Great to be here, David.
So here's how this is going to work, guys. I came up with 5 major points that we're going to discuss why this is a perfect movie. No sequence, no, random. It's in random order. So, I'm just going to put it out there. We're going to talk about each point, move on, put it out there, talk about it. And, so it's going to be quick for you guys. But it's important. These are the important points of the movie. And this is why it is a perfect movie. And as we go through, I think you're going to find that a few of these are incredibly important. So, as everybody knows, this is another Captain America movie. This is a sequel, which is, I put on, as far as sequels, high praise for this because there's only about 7 or 8 movies that ever are out there, that are as good, if not better than the original. This is one of them. So let me ask you this, Kyle. Do you remember the first time that you saw Captain America Winter Soldier?
Yeah, I saw it the Saturday after it came out. I wanted to see this movie. Like, it wasn't a movie like, now when I would go to a Marvel film, I would go opening night. Here I had a little bit more restraint because at the time, the MCU wasn't as big as it is now. It was pretty big, but it wasn't as big. And I remember the first Captain America I was so excited for. And I was a little bit disappointed by it when I first saw it. Not that it was a bad movie, but I wanted more, I wanted more from that movie than what we got. This film gave me everything I wanted and even more. And as someone that, was into Captain America beforehand, I truly felt like this was, the perfect Captain America movie. But David, do you remember when you saw it for the first time?
Wow. I don't even know if I saw this in theaters.
Wow.
It was, yeah, I know. It's been a while. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I can't tell you the first time I saw it, but when I saw it for the first time, I really liked it.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't one of those where you just got to sit on and go, okay, go back and watch it. I really liked the everything about this, and we'll get into these points here in a minute. I just think that this movie for me is not only a saving grace of Phase 2, but I think of the whole MCU.
Oh yeah,
and we're going to get into that in a minute. And it's just people, as far as when everybody does their rankings, this is in the top 5 for me, hands down. And I think that this is why we're doing perfect movies, and this is one of those perfect movies. So let's start off real quick, and let's talk about the action, because I think the action here is some of the best action you're going to ever see in a movie. And it starts right off the top in the first 10 minutes with Cap landing on the boat and going, fighting GSP. So all those who aren't familiar with GSP, George St. Pierre. Go ahead.
That sequence, when I saw it for the first time in theaters, that was the moment I knew that this film was unlike any other MCU movie that had come before, and also it was what I wanted from the first Captain America. Because if you watch the first Avenger, the action is good, but it's not something to write home about. It's not, John Wick or The Raid or a number of other, action-centered movies. I mean, yes, Captain America is an action-based character, but he doesn't necessarily need to be really that, action-centric. Even like Black Widow, I think you need a more action-centric movie with a Black Widow. However, that being said, I think that Winter Soldier really does an incredible job at setting that action in place from almost the first 10 minutes in, I believe, because I will say that I remember Chris Evans talked about what inspired the action of this movie was the Captain America the First Avenger video game. It was the tie-in game for the movie. And if you play that game, the action's incredible. It's very similar to like a Batman Arkham Asylum, Arkham Knight game where you are fighting other characters with multiple counter techniques, counter attacks, vaulting over characters. You're using the shield in different ways. And that's something the first Captain America movie just didn't have. It was action just for the sake of action. Where here, you legitimately have this scene that you just described with Captain America and his team of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents infiltrating the Numerian Star, the ship in the ocean that is being commandeered and taken over by a bunch of, shall we say, terrorists. And in the case of one of the terrorists, it's Batroc, who is played by George St. Pierre. Now, Batroc is from the comics. He's known as Batroc the Leaper. And if you read the comics, he's a very silly-looking character with this mustache that makes him look like almost a circus act. And he has these purple, yellow spandex that, when going into the Winter Soldier, you didn't know, what to expect from this character, but just watching this one sequence, and it's one of my favorite sequences when Captain America fights him, and he's like, "What are you like without the mask?" And then, he's like, I think he says something on the order of, "You have the mask on, you need a mask to fight," or something, and then he takes the mask off, and him and Captain America are fighting each other, and it's just, I mean, as an opening sequence goes, it is, in my opinion, like top 5 MCU openings. And that's saying a lot, because there's a lot of great openings to MCU movies, whether it's Endgame, Infinity War, Iron Man 1. Almost every MCU movie actually has a pretty great beginning in it. But here, we get to see Captain America unleash his super soldier. And also, what's really cool is that he has now learned techniques and fighting styles that he didn't know in the 40s. So the way he's fighting, he's able to fight more like someone that would fight in today's day and age. And that is also why they hired George St. Pierre to play Batroc, because he can also maybe teach other fighters stunt doubles. And it's just an incredible way of fighting choreography displayed. And that's just Captain America. Then we get to Black Widow in this sequence, where she's dropping down and she's taking down these characters. And in my opinion, this is peak Black Widow. This is where you get to see, really, I think, the Black Widow that even like the Avengers, we saw a bit of the way she fought in the chair in the first scene that she has in the Avengers. But here she's knocking guys left to right. She's doing these like kicks and flips, and she's almost like flirting with them at the same time, because that's kind of how she was trained. And it's just an incredible opening action sequence.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. It's a top 5 action sequence. I think that something else that's missing that people it's really underrated is the editing. When you have a sequence like this, that you have to be able to cut back and forth. And there's even, there's one shot of, a wide shot.
Yeah.
And so you're getting the close, and that the Russos did such a great job of this. They did the close hand to hand, and then they went wide. So when he gets flipped backwards, you see him, and you see how big of a stage, so to speak, it's on. And it's the fight the bridge. Let's talk about the bridge for a minute. This is some of the best fight choreography I have ever seen. I mean, I've watched thousands and thousands and thousands. This is some of the best fight choreography I have ever seen. And the training that, it's one of the things where people watch it and they take it for granted. These guys are in there for hours, not only learning, how to do this, but they're learning the moves. So when they get on, and mind you, they've got to rehearse it too. So when they get out there, they're able to go blow for blow for blow for blow. So it's just phonetic and how it's going. But the editing, second to none.
I love how Cap uses his shield in this opening sequence because he's using it to bounce off of the wall to hit a guy. He's using it as a way of deflecting things. Even later in the movie, when he jumps out the window, he uses it as a literal shield, a way to protect himself.
Yeah.
It's something that really, I think, defines the Captain America character. And also, I want to take his suit. It's called the stealth suit. It's this blue outfit that he ends up wearing again in Endgame. And it is, to this day, I think, a lot of people's favorite Captain America suit he wears in the movies. It's actually Chris Evans' favorite one. And it is actually a callback to the comics where he's known as Commander Rogers. And he has a very similar outfit. And it's almost like the way it's interpreted, it's a way for him to go on missions as a stealth officer that, you'll see the red, white, and blue, but if he wears the blue and black, it's not as hard to, well, it is pretty hard, but it's much harder for them to find him in the battle. And even his shield's a different color. It's the blue and white as his costume is. And it's just a really cool outfit that he only wears in the first half of the movie. After he's running away from S.H.I.E.L.D., he forgoes it. But it's also, I think, very much speaking towards his character in the movie, because as we'll get into later with the themes, this movie's a lot about, our trust in government, our trust in those who have power. And in the beginning of this film, Captain America is someone that is very, very dedicated towards his government. But yeah, that I really loved. Another action sequence we should discuss is the Nick Fury chase sequence that occurs in the streets of Washington. And this I tell you, I don't know, you probably watched it for the first time when you saw it in the movie, but I actually saw that sequence the first time in on television when I was watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and they actually showed us that sequence before the movie came out. And I remember watching it there, and I was completely hooked in. I was like, whoa, this is something else. And when they showed in the trailers, you see Fury's car get blown up, and you're like, they didn't kill Nick Fury, did they? Did they show us him dying? And you think they did, but then he's brought back to life. But the scene is great because it shows you this incredible, chase sequence, and then you're introduced to the Winter Soldier, who then becomes one of the huge important, elements to the action of the film itself, because him just walking out, the way Sebastian Stan walks in this sequence, and he just gets his gun and shoots, and you hear the music, and then you see it blow up. It's just, this is what, you want to see when you see an MCU film, but it's also what you want to see when you want to see a great movie and a great suspenseful political thriller.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the last thing I'll say with the action and the choreography is the elevator scene. That's all you got to say. The elevator
another
scene.
Sequence,
we're going to move on, but I mean, that elevator scene was just I mean, I love how he said, you see that shot of everybody from the back. Does anybody want to get out before we begin?
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things. It's like, okay, you know what's coming. And it's just,
and it just builds
Unbelievable.
tension. That's what
Yeah.
does the sweat on their heads. That is
Oh, yeah.
great action. That
The guy, the hand on the holster, amazing.
Oh,
So let's move on. So the second major point about this is name recognition.
mhm.
So up until that point, I mean, yeah, you had Robert Downey Jr. and you had, a couple other actors, Scarlett Johansson, everybody, but you had never had that big name. This was the first time Marvel brought in a big, big name to play a role I think was perfect for them. Didn't have to be on screen that much, but it was an important part of the story, and that was Robert Redford playing Alexander Pierce. The way he makes an appearance, just in the first shot when Captain walks in, and so basically he's trying to talk to the captain about what happened and everything else, and it's like this lends, without going deep into it, this lends to the definite political angle, credence to that to the film. I mean, all you have to do is take a look at the shot of him leaning out, looking out the window. Okay, this is what. I mean, don't forget, he was in that huge film, I won't say huge film, but he was in a film 4 years ago called All the President's Men, about literally a political thriller with Deep Throat and the Nixon administration. He is perfect for this. And to have it be the first person to do this, it's amazing. And then, on top of all of that, you take a look at how many big names you have in the MCU, whether it's a Glenn Close, whether it's a Sylvester Stallone, whether it's, you can go on and on and on and on and on.
Michael Douglas, right?
Michael Douglas.
Well,
I mean, so
I think when you bring up Robert Redford, another element to this that I really like is the fact that you also kind of have a relationship angle to this, because you have Robert Redford's in this movie, and he's starring in this movie with Scarlett Johansson, who he had starred about 20 years before in The Horse Whisperer. And then you have, Scarlett Johansson and Chris Evans, who have been friends for as long as I know of, but they were in a movie together called The Perfect Score, and they are really great friends in real life. So you have a lot of these actors in this movie that not only know each other, but they have starred in movies together, and they get scenes together. Like, there's a scene between Scarlett Johansson and Robert Redford in this, and
I'm sorry. Did I step on your moment?
And a lot of these actors that are in this movie also add that 70s, aesthetic to the film that really gives it credence. And even Gary Sinise, he's, you might miss him, but he actually is the voice of the narrator at the Smithsonian Museum as they're looking at the Captain America, memorials and Captain America exhibits. So it's filled with an incredible cast. I really think that this could be I almost said Steve Rogers, Chris Evans' best performance. He is so good in this. And the same can be said for Scarlett Johansson, Samuel Jackson, and Anthony Mackie, who, going into this, I didn't know how I would feel about Anthony Mackie as the Falcon. He hadn't really been in as many movies as, I thought, many people, I think, saw 8 Mile, but I hadn't really seen him in much before this, and I was just blown away by him, and he's a perfect Sam Wilson.
Yeah, he really, just to your point real quick about how he's even introduced, one of the first, in the first 5 minutes when he's running around the Washington Monument on your left. It's just, and then we get the call back later on. It's just unbelievable. Okay, so you talked about it briefly, but I'm going to go into it more in depth now, and that's the theme of this movie. themes are important in all movies. What is the theme of the movie? And it could be like an Avatar, for example, where you have environmental, save the environment type of thing, or you could have whatever it is. The overarching theme of this movie is still relevant today, okay? And the theme of this movie is privacy versus protection. How much privacy are you willing to give up for the protection, and how much freedom? So you have to be able to balance that. And this, even today, we're still talking about this. This came out in 2000. But this can be said for anything, whether it's your emails. And by the way I forgot the actor's name and I forgot the character's name, but he was on the ship when he was talking to Pierce on the phone with the dot on the red tie.
Oh, Frank Grillo? Frank.
Yes, thank you. Even him, how. So he was interrogating the person about Project Insight. Anyways, the point is that he basically was telling him about how they were going to target these people.
That's
okay.
Yeah.
But whether it's your SAT scores, your emails, your text messages, your medical records, whatever else, and it's so prevalent today because everything's online. Everything. Why identity theft happens? How much protection are you willing to have against your privacy? And so this can be demonstrated in that scene when they're in the bunker. And so they're talking with the doctor, whom they think is dead. And they said,
Arnim Zola.
Yeah. And so you're in my brain right now. And by the way, if history didn't go the way we wanted it, look what we did. We changed history. And so, how they were able to infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D. and everything else. And by the way, let's go back to Black Widow for a minute. She thought she was playing, turns out she was playing for the wrong team, as she once said in the film. The theme is so prevalent today and so important. What do you do? And so what did you think about that theme how it came across?
It's just every time I watch this movie, I'm just struck by how, as you said, even how relevant it still is today, and how we are still seeing, the elements, if not even more so today, of how even the way the government might operate and the secrets that are being kept from us. Even it deals with, what happened with Edward Snowden. It deals with stuff that with WikiLeaks and all this stuff that I bet when Stan Lee, when Jack Kirby and all these comic book writers back in the day were writing these characters, they couldn't have even dreamed of, where these characters could have gone. But when it comes to this movie, you're talking about that Zola scene. I think that it's just also the twist of Hydra, because that, for me, I still remember when I found that out. As I said, when I was watching this film, I was blown away by it, and I thought it was everything I wanted in a Captain America movie. It was one of the best MCU movies. And then there's the Hydra twist, and it's revealed that Hydra has been a part of S.H.I.E.L.D. since the beginning. And it is honestly, it's one of the best twists in cinema. It really is. I understand. It's it's me making some bold statements, but I think it's, just as big as Luke, I am your father, Well,
I would even put it up there with The Usual Suspects.
Yeah,
that's how good this twist was. And a great twist is something nobody ever sees coming, right? Because if you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, I know what the twist is going to be, and then it happens, you're not surprised or whatever. you want to be surprised. So when that twist happens, you're like, oh shit.
Because like
that totally threw me for a loop.
You are watching the movie and you know something's not right. Something's not right with Frank Grillo's character, Brock Rumlow. He's Crossbones. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing the shirt that's like the Crossbones outfit that he wears. But like Agent Sitwell, he was the character you were referring to before that was trying to tell them about the way that the that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been monitoring everyone. All these characters, they've appeared in other movies. Like Sitwell, he goes back to the first Thor. A character that you see near the end of the film, or more so like the middle, that Sitwell's talking to, played by the late great Gary Shandling. He's if you remember, he was in Iron Man 2.
Iron Man.
And
it's such a small little prick.
It's such a small, role. But I remember when I saw it, I was like, oh my God. And then when he whispers, Hail Hydra, it's like they got Gary Shandling.
But this isn't the place to talk about it. It's a nice piano. Thank you. Come here. Hail Hydra. See, it's right.
Have even like Steve Rogers' next door neighbor, who is Sharon Carter. Well, first off, you don't know she's Sharon Carter in this movie. You don't know she's related to Peggy. Until there's like one little reference, which says, I'm visiting my aunt in the hospital, I think she says. But the thing is that when it's revealed she's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, I think I knew about it going in, but like there are a number of people that don't know about that going in. There's a number of people that like don't know if even Fury is in the right because the way they try to spin it. And as we see today with how like the media is being used as a way to trick people and tell lies, and how there are numbers of people out there that don't even trust what they're reading, there's a great element to this movie that explores those ideas. And how does someone like Captain America, who is so devoted to the American government, how does he deal with that? And that's something that he struggles with.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing. As I said, it still lends credence today, and it's still one of those things that we struggle with and we wrestle with it. How much privacy against protection, against and it affects our everyday lives. So moving on, this topic, this is our next point, and it's the elements of the film. And I'll let you dive into this in a minute. So I thought that this is one of those movies that had, just like any other good movie, had all of the elements. Imagine a recipe. You're making a cake. If you add too much of this, it's not going to rise as much. If you add too much of this, it's not going to, be rich enough. So you have to be able to balance everything. This is one of those movies that had just the perfect balance of romance, of comedy, of action, of political drama. You had everything just in perfect form. So tell me about the elements of the film, Kyle, and what you really thought about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, to the point about romance, what's really interesting about this is he doesn't end up with Black Widow. Like, I think one of the interesting elements of this movie is that they have this, like, flirtation going around the entire film. And whether it's her kissing him to, distract others, whether it's her talking to him about the last time he kissed a girl, there's a lot of elements, even to him, liking Sharon Carter. But, I mean, the way that the movie works, I feel like a lesser film would have just had him end up with Black Widow at the end. But the fact that they're really just colleagues, and it's that line, I still remember, David, to this day, when I saw the trailer of this movie, and it was like Black Widow saying, how's your dating life going? And she's like trying to help him get a girlfriend.
So this one of the scenes you're referring to, and this is just goes back to the action, but it's the comedy mixed in, right?
Yeah.
So they have Sidwell on the roof, and so he's telling him about a Project Insight, and she says, you're not going to throw me off the roof. That's not your style. And he's like, you're right, it isn't, but it's hers. So she kicks him off the roof. Oh, what about that nurse down at the hospital? Oh, it's Cindy, right?
Yeah.
No, Sherry. You know, and then you see, to talk about an introduction, you see Falcon come up, played by Anthony Mackie, Sam Wilson in the movie, and it's like, okay, not only did you get the funny portion, not only did you get the drama, but you got a brand new character coming in.
But but you get to see, you get to see a man and a woman in this movie, and they're friends. Like, yeah, they might be somewhat attracted to each other, but it's, I mean, if you look at it, especially like comic book movies, if you look at just the genre itself, almost every comic book film needs a romance in it. Like, that's like what, well, not that it needs it, but like the studio wants to put it in. Daredevil, which starred Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner, actually, they filmed a sex scene in that movie that was intended for the theatrical release of the film. And when the director did the director's cut, he cut the sex scene out. Because, like, that's just the way the studio is operated. Here, it's so refreshing to see this relationship. And I think it actually gives Black Widow as a character even more agency, because in Iron Man 2, she's basically just a character that is used for the male gaze until the end, when she, does some really cool stuff. But even in the end, it's still, the male gaze. Here, we have Black Widow in a way that isn't really objectifying. And there are also, like, if we want to talk about more elements of the film, there's also the music, because the music of the movie does not get enough credit. First off, it's the score by Henry Jackman. Henry Jackman ended up being a great friend of the MCU, where he actually ended up scoring the score for Captain America Civil War and the score for The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So he continued to work there, but this was his like opening score for the MCU, and it is outstanding. Whether the Winter Soldier piece, whether the main theme of Captain America, and there's a lot of really good elements, but like the score, I still remember to this day, is amazing. But also the music choices, because I don't know if you know this, but there's a song in here, and oh man, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they actually play it during Fury's, like, when he's in the room in the apartment and he's telling Captain America to keep the lights off, and they're playing this song. And that song is later played in the end of Avengers Endgame. And that's the song that ends the movie. There's also another song, Trouble Man by Marvin Gaye, that's the key element to this film, where I think we got to talk about this, the book. So Captain America has this book, or we shall say he has this list. And when he came back from the ice, a lot of people told him to watch movies and shows and music, listen to some music they never heard of before, because he was asleep and frozen when that happened. And Falcon says at the beginning of the movie, you gotta listen to Trouble Man by Marvin Gaye. And at the end of the movie, they played Trouble Man, and that's kind of like what wakes Captain America up from like his small coma. And it's such a great, needle drop in the movie. And they just, as you said, like all the elements of this film, the comedy, the action, the acting, even some of the small romances of the film itself, like they really, make for such a perfect film.
Yeah. And so there's one last element we're going to talk about, and that is the Russo brothers. Now, up until this point, nobody really known or knew who they were. I think they did like one or two small little things. I think they did You, Me, and Dupree. So far out there that who are these guys really? So for me, it's not a stretch to say that this wasn't only the best film in Phase 2, but it saved the MCU. Because at the time, to your poster I know you enjoy it, Thor: The Dark World had come out, okay, and even though financially it wasn't that big of a hit, I mean, even though for sequels and whatever else, but you look at what kind of film they made, and they went on to direct three of the biggest films, and especially MCU films, of all time. You had Civil War, which made $1.1 billion. You had Infinity War, which I just watched the other night, that I've watched it 4 times and still gets me. And Endgame, $2.789 million. They made almost $6 billion worth of box office.
Wow.
If that decision hadn't been made to get the Russo brothers, and I know it's money and it's business and everything else, but I think had you not gotten the Russo brothers to do this, this would not have been the film that we would remember 8-9 years today and be one of the perfect films. This, I mean, look, everybody wants money and how much it's going to make and everything else. I get it, but there's so many other things that make this that when you put all of those 4 other elements together, that's what you get, and it just worked. And they did it one after the other. They weren't just a one-hit wonder. They came back and back and back and back. I think the Russo brothers saved the MCU. I have no doubt in my mind. Because
I have
to your point.
What's interesting about this is that we now live in a world post Avengers Endgame where the Russo brothers have now been making other movies. And frankly, at least the one film I've seen of theirs, The Gray Man, is awful. It is a terrible, terrible film. And you do see, I think, you mentioned how, we're talking about perfect movies and we're talking about, directors are heavily important in a film. But there are also elements of the film that I think are also just as important, and those are the producers and those are the writers. And in the case of this movie, I don't want to, put the Russo brothers down or anything, because I do think that they did they really contributed a lot to this film. But Kevin Feige himself, the main producer head of this, Louis D'Esposito, another producer, the way that they were able to manage this film, I think the Russos were a perfect get into this movie because they kind of came in and they kind of added a bit of a tone to it, and they were able to kind of come in as these new directors that hadn't really done anything film related other than You, Me, and Dupree with Owen Wilson. They did TV work, but they hadn't, done feature films. This was a little different than what Marvel had done before, where they would get established directors like a Kenneth Branagh for Thor, a Jon Favreau for Iron Man. They even got, for the first Captain America, a Joe Johnston, who he actually worked on the first Star Wars, and he worked on all the Star Wars, and he really kind of came in and he did The Rocketeer, so he came in and added a little bit more vibe of that. And it's you look at that, that was phase 1 of the MCU, and now you get to phase 2, and they're starting to pick directors that aren't as, big, like an Alan Taylor for Thor, The Dark World, and a Russo brothers for Captain America, The Winter Soldier, a James Gunn for Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think the Russo brothers did a great job, but also we gotta add Marcus and McFeely, the writers of this movie. They wrote Captain America: The First Avenger. They ended up writing Civil War, and then they wrote Infinity War and Endgame. They also wrote The Gray Man, which as I said before.
Well, like how we always say, everybody has a bad day at the office.
Everybody has a bad day at the office. And they came up with this screenplay that was just so, so good. And you have just, an all-star team here that continued to make, this team made 4 incredible films: Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame.
I think that the biggest thing, the word you're looking for is consistency.
Yes.
Had you gone out and you gotten somebody else to do a Civil War, had you gone out to get somebody else to do an Infinity War, it would have been up in the air. They didn't know what they wanted. But because McFeely and Marcus knew what they were doing, that Kevin said, okay, guys, here's what we have planned. And by the way, they're juggling these things. They were coming up with a twist for Civil War when they were doing Winter Soldier. They had, all these things going. And it's one of those things where this is why, and I keep saying it, and I know it's subjective, Kevin Feige is the best studio head in Hollywood. Because what he does is, if he's not the best, he is one of the best. Because this man plans 5, 6, 7 years ahead. So it's like chess. You're not looking at 1 or 2 steps. He's looking 7 steps ahead. He already knows what your next move's going to be after your next. So the thing is that he's already got a plan. And so when you see these things start to come to order, when you see these movies start to come out, how big of a hit they are, and the anticipation. I mean, we just talked about it the other day. The Guardians of the Galaxy 3, directed by James Gunn. They were looking at this long before that. Kevin Feige is an amazing, amazing conductor. It reminds me of a scene out of Steve Jobs, one of my favorite films. And the guy says, "What do you do?" He says, "I conduct. I lead the orchestra." That's what Kevin Feige is. He leads the orchestra. He said, "You sit you're the best conductor, you're the best orchestra player in your own line." That's what these guys are. They're basically they play their instruments, but he just directs everything. And when he directs a symphony, you get an Avengers Infinity War, you get an Avengers Endgame, you get something that makes $3 billion, $325 million opening weekend. So when you get consistency, that's the key word. Consistency, it all comes together. And it may not come together in this one, but I guarantee you in the next one, or 2 films down the road, that's when it all comes to fruition.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, throw out the money for a minute. I mean, yeah, this made $700 million and everything else. It isn't about the money. I was just having a conversation with somebody off air. It's not about the money for these guys. These are going to make money. These are going to make money from now on. It's about making good content. It's about putting the source material on screen for you, the viewer, to be like, yes, I like that. Even if they tweak it up a little bit. I mean, the twist the twist in Civil War, nobody saw that coming. That's just as good of a twist in Winter Soldier as in a Civil War. So when you have that, it works.
You mentioned source material, and we can't end this discussion without talking about literally the biggest thing in this movie, and that is the title of the film itself, The Winter Soldier. And for me, what was really cool about this movie going into it is, you got to understand, this is the second Captain America movie. This is the sequel. This is the sequel to the first Avenger, but it's also, in a way, a sequel to the Avengers. Because when the Avengers came out, it wasn't about, they finally made this movie, this movie about all of these characters getting together, and that's it. No, they decided to continue. And it was something unprecedented, that had never been done before, in the fact that they were technically making sequels to one movie. So, it wasn't like they were making just a sequel to Iron Man 2, but now they were mainly also making a sequel to the Avengers. And this Avengers movie came up with, essentially sequels of Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, Winter Soldier, and these are all movies that exist in the aftermath. So this movie deals a lot more with the SHIELD aspect, and it deals a lot more with Captain America. But what it deals the most with is the Winter Soldier. And the Winter Soldier was Bucky Barnes was created in 1941. He has been a mainstay of Captain America since literally the beginning. They created the Winter Soldier idea back in 2006. And they made Bucky Barnes lose his memory, because in the comics he does die. He perishes in like an airplane accident, and the Marvel comics in 2006, they were like, you know what, we're gonna bring him back, but we're gonna bring him back as this killing machine that forgets who he is. And it was always a question, how are they gonna adapt this? As someone that did read the comics, I was very curious to see how they would turn Sebastian Stan's Bucky from the first film into this well-rounded villain, and they did it with flying colors. I would argue that the Winter Soldier could be the best MCU character. It's unbelievable how Sebastian Stan plays this role as a man like in pain. He's being brainwashed, and he's also so cool when he's the Winter Soldier, because he has this, badass cybernetic arm. He has these goggles that he wears for the first half of the movie that I thought was so cool. His mask and his long hair, and then just the way he fights. We're talking at the beginning of this with the action, the way he moves the knife, the way that he uses the gun. The final fight at the end between him and Captain America, where he's just beating the crap out of Steve Rogers, and then Steve's like saying, "I'm with you to the end of the line." And you get that pain and anguish in him. And then there's the reveal itself of it being Bucky. Now, to many people that are comic fans, we knew he was going to be the Winter Soldier the minute they announced the Winter Soldier. But it's interesting to see how this movie will be viewed by non-comic fans and also people in the future that are going to watch these movies for the first time without, marketing and such, because that is a major twist in this movie that no one would see coming if they hadn't, seen the trailers or comics. And they do a great job showing this character, showing how powerful he is. And it's just, he's one of my favorite characters. What did you think of the Winter Soldier?
Yeah, no, it's just how everything about him, whether it's his costume, because look, anybody can act. It's how he looks, right?
Yes.
And when you have the mask and the goggles and you have the fight choreography, he could go toe to toe with Steve. You believe that. And you didn't want somebody that was going to overpower him, but you wanted somebody that was going to be his equal.
Yeah.
And that's what he was. He was his equal. And so, to your point at the end of the movie, when he says, "I'm with you all to the end of the line," we get that callback later on in another film. But moreover than that, there's that flashback, right? So where he says, "You don't have to be alone. I'm with you to the end of the line." So, even, the beginning of the third act, when he's like, Sam comes up to him, he's like, he may not remember it. He's like, he will, and that's when he goes to get the uniform. He steals the uniform, which, by the way, we got to talk about about. Stan Lee makes it a cameo in every single one. But he walks into this frame and go, so yeah, this movie is just, this is why it is a perfect movie, guys.
Absolutely.
Forget about the money aspect. It's a perfect movie. And we're going to be doing a lot more of these moving forward. So we're doing this one. We got Skyfall coming up. We got The Dark Knight, which basically changed Hollywood. And then, for a while. We got The Social Network. We got all these other movies that are just Star Wars. Black Panther, speaking MCU movies, is another perfect movie. So yeah, we got all these great movies coming up. So moving forward, we're going to be doing this as we did this today in bullet points and just talk about them. What do you guys think about all this? Did we touch on something that you liked? Do you think we missed something? Leave us your thoughts down there in the comments so we can get back to you. I know that, and this is Film Twitter is going to be a buzz about this. Where can they find you on Twitter, Kyle?
My Twitter profile is at Arking Kyle. That's capital ARKING, capital KYLE.
Perfect. And I'm on Twitter myself, and that is going to be at Wannabe Rounder. That's WANNABEROUNDER. And like I said, guys, we're going to be doing all these movies. Don't forget, we've got a ton of other stuff for you coming up this in 2023. We've got the roundup still going to keep going on. Don't worry about that. So we are going to be doing first reaction movies. These are movies that I have seen that Kyle has not, or Kyle has seen that I have not. I have a list of 10 movies already that I really do need to get to watching. And so what we're going to do is we're going to rotate movies. So, and he's going to, that way he can get exposed to new things and vice versa. And that's going to be a whole other separate thing, along with Perfect Movies, along with the roundup. So you guys are going to be getting a ton of content. Please, if you want to shoot us a message, follow us on Twitter. We're always on there, looking at great stuff. And yeah, I'm excited for 2023. This is going to be moving forward. We've got a plan. This is going to be great stuff. So, all right. On that note, we will catch you guys, later this week for the roundup, and, you guys will have that stuff. So for Kyle, I'm David. This has been the Perfect Movie Series, and you have been listening to Real Talks. Bye-bye.